Cortez. I'm happy to be here to talk a little bit about analytical writing. So the goal for today is just to go through a few basic things, give you some resources that you can follow up, on your own time, and then take some examples. Okay, so there are two parts to the analytical writing section, and we'll look at some examples of both of them and give you a chance to work through them. So, I want to start by just giving you a little bit of background. You may already know this, you may not, about what the exam is going to look like on this section. And we'll talk about some general strategies, things to keep in mind, and then we'll go in a little bit more depth about what analytic thinking is in theory or in general terms. And then, as I say, we'll take some examples. So, sure. Yeah, go ahead and jump in anytime to ask questions.
Which country do you come from?
The United States. Yeah, it's a little bit of a joke. I say that to all my American students. Right? I always introduce myself, and they always stare at me like they don't know what to do when someone says hello. Good clarification. That was the easiest question. We'll get on that. So there are two parts to the exam. The first is called an issue element, where you're going to be asked to develop your own argument on a general issue. Okay? So in this case, you're going to be constructing an argument on the spot for or against some general idea that they will introduce on the question portion of the exam. So this is where you're going to be doing your own thinking and coming up with your own examples and your own case for or against, okay? The second part is analyzing somebody else's argument. So they'll give you an argument, and you can believe that some of the argument will be decent and some of it will probably be pretty poor, okay? Or vague enough that there will be things that are not good about it. So in that case, you are evaluating somebody else's argument. Okay? Now, the general rule, in logic, is that it should not just be your opinion. Okay? If all you're doing is sort of stating what you believe or what you were taught, you will not score well. Okay? What you're trying to do is give reasons and examples that will lead to a certain kind of conclusion. And in philosophy, we call this a case-building argument. So an inductive argument is an argument where you work from specifics to a general case. So if you're a biologist and 99 cases out of 100 occurred when somebody ate an egg and they got sick, then you can generalize that people eating these eggs are going to get sick. Okay? A deductive argument goes in the opposite direction and is dependent upon the logical form. You don't necessarily need to know these things. The case-building argument is the most complex kind of argument. And it can involve both inductive and deductive claims. It can involve all kinds of examples. Okay? You might think of case-building arguments as a kind of lawyerly argument. That is to say, in a case of law, the lawyer is not just going to trot out a bunch of facts. She might do that, but not just that. And they're not going to offer some kind of deductive proof. All men are mortal, Socrates is mortal, therefore Socrates is a man, or something like that. What they're going to do is use some facts, they're going to use some perspective or background assumptions, and they're going to build a case, right, that John was the murderer. It's not going to be an absolutely open and shut kind of case, and that will certainly be true of these examples, right? They're not going to give you something that's totally obvious or totally, conclusive in one way or the other. There'll be general ideas like, does technology make us smarter or dumber? I mean, they won't say it that simply, but like that. Well, heck, you could argue all kinds of things about that, right? So they be kind of open-ended that way. And you should think of both of these tasks as a kind of case-building situation. In this case, you're going to be building the case, right? You will try to develop an argument with specific conclusions, right? And reasons for those conclusions. Here, you're going to be evaluating how good the case you are given is. Okay? So again, we want to make sure that we're not just offering personal opinions or views that we were taught as children in school or something like that, right? I say a little bit later, you want to avoid stream of consciousness writing. Stream of consciousness writing is the kind of writing where you hear a topic, you get a little nervous, and you just start thinking of everything that has anything to do with the topic, and then you just start writing it down in whatever order it appeared in your consciousness. Do not do that. You know, maybe sometimes in your English classes there's a kind of writing style where that's appropriate. Absolutely not appropriate here. Okay? Because your brain doesn't think in case-building terms. Your brain is going to offer a lot of things up to you for consideration. You have to put the case together, right? You've got to put that case together. So kind of avoid, I would say, gut reactions. Avoid starting to write right away. Even when you're doing your own argument, you want to sit down and say, okay, what are some reasons for thinking X? What are some reasons for thinking not X? And then kind of go through the reasons and see which side seems like a better case to build. Then you can start writing. If you just start writing right off the bat, chances are you'll end up with this kind of stream of consciousness where it's really hard for your reader, and in this case your reader is the person who's scoring your exam, to know what the connections between your ideas are. Okay, so a couple of other general points here. They're not content specific, right? Which means you don't have to know specialized content. So if the example is, you know, TVs making children dumber, you don't have to be an expert on television or child development or child psychology to build an argument, right? If the argument is on something in politics, we should allow less government spying or something. They're not going to be expecting that you're citing, you know, relevant passages in the Constitution or something like that. They're expecting that anybody who's lived in the country for a little while will have an idea of some of the pros and cons, and will put together an argument based on it. Yeah.
Does that mean it's bad to include something specific in this?
No. So I put no personal opinions here, and over there, later I put watch the purely personal. It's okay that you put specific things in. Examples are really good, but you have to be careful that they're not really only a series of personal examples. Right? So if the example is technology makes us dumber, and you had a roommate who used to get high and play games all the time, and he flunked out of college, and you say, well, this is clearly evidence that all technology makes everyone dumber, right? Well, obviously it could have been the technology, but it could have also been the pot, and it could have been both of those things, and it could have been something totally different. So you want to be careful not to be only reliant on kind of your own personal experience. Those can be good examples, and they can really highlight points, but you want to be careful that it's not just a series of subjective experiences, you know, that one person might have had and the other person would be totally different, if that makes sense. Okay. So it's a fine line. Rhetorically, examples that are personal can be really powerful, but the more personal they are, the more likely it is that they don't apply to other people's experience. Makes sense. I don't know, does that help or?
Yeah, I was thinking more of in the realm like of if you know something to be universal, some event, historical event that would be relevant to the argument.
Oh.
Or I don't know what the odds are if you could cite some finding that you read, perhaps.
Yeah, yeah, you could use those. I think the way they ask the questions, it's probably pretty unlikely that you would be able, you know, they really don't want content experts because that would make it unfair, right? If they did something where, you know, it was animal science and, you know, well, what the heck, the person who knows animal science is going to have a lot more facts, is going to be able to marshal evidence a lot better. So they're going to want to try to steer away from that. And we'll take some examples. I think you'll get the flavor of it pretty quickly. Yeah, but good, really good question. So the other thing to note is there is no single right answer. Don't spend time trying to figure out what they're looking for. They don't, I mean, the secret is they don't care what your answer is. What do they care about? If they don't care, yeah, if they don't care what your answer is, what's the only thing left? The quality of your argument, okay? The quality of your argument. So when we see the examples, we'll see that, you know, again, they're general ones, and you could make a pretty good case for either position, okay? That doesn't mean that you can just say, well, it's all a toss-up, you know, everyone's got a different opinion, so there's no right answer. Don't say that either. You know, you can do that in a philosophy class, but don't do it here, right? So they want to see that you come to a conclusion, and you come to that conclusion based on reasoning, based on evidence and reasoning. Okay, so a couple of other just general points here. What's the difference between a conclusion and a premise? Has anybody had logic? Logic, you should take Philosophy 100 if you really want to get better at analytic writing. Philosophy 100 is general logic, so this is where you learn about case-building arguments, other kinds of arguments. Does anybody know what's the difference between a premise and an argument, or a premise and a conclusion? So a conclusion is your final answer, right? A premise is a reason for believing, can't spell, your conclusion. So be wary of jumping to conclusions too fast. You know, I would say better to think through the reasoning first, right? So on your analyze an issue, your first response might be, oh, I think this is right, or this is wrong, or this is clearly the case. That's okay, but don't automatically start writing. What you want to focus on, why would I believe that? What are some reasons for believing that? Now those reasons, I mean, that's a general term, right? Reasons, what are your reasons? Those could be scientific facts, they could be personal experiences, they could be you know, cultural beliefs or traditions that have some, you know, reasoning behind them. They could be a lot of different things. But what they're going to be looking for is that you clearly state your conclusion, or in the second one, clearly identify the conclusion, and then that you build your own case and or correctly analyze the case that was given to you. So you look at the reasons for believing. So let's just take a really simple example. Socrates is a man. All men are mortal. Therefore, Socrates is mortal. Your conclusion can come at any point. Right? It would be nice in spoken or written word if everybody saved their conclusion for the end, or everybody started with their conclusion. But that's not always the case. Sometimes the conclusion comes right in the middle, right? So they give some reasons, then they throw in their conclusion, and then they think of some more reasons that they throw in there, right? So the order of presentation is not necessary in either of these analyze an issue or in analyze an argument. So when you get to that analyze an argument section, the very first sentence might be the conclusion, right? So a politician might say, you know, we should spend more money on the military, and then go on to list a bunch of things, and that's the conclusion. was we should spend more money on the military. Russia's building up their military might. There's a war in the Middle East. My constituents are all military contractors. Therefore. Okay? So when you're thinking about either analyze or building your own argument, be sure that you know what the heck these things are. If you're not sure what these are, I can almost guarantee your reader is not going to know exactly what the hell you're trying to say. You know what I mean? Does that make sense? So, and we'll take some examples here. So, final tips, and then we'll go to the theory. Avoid stream of consciousness. I already talked about that. Identify conclusion and premises. Just talked about that. Use examples and counterexamples. So, if you're thinking about the argument of the other, and you think of an example that works against their claim, that's just a counterexample. And those are powerful. Right? So using examples and counterexamples is a good practice. Again, you want to be a little careful not to only have your own personal experience. You can use those rhetorically here and there, but your case building and your analysis shouldn't be purely dependent upon your subjective experience. All right? And lastly, be wary of implicit claim. What is an implicit claim? It's the opposite of explicit. What's an implicit claim?
It's claimed but not said.
Yeah, it's implied. It's not said explicitly. Okay? Especially in the analyze the argument, you may get implicit claims. Okay? Now this seems weird. Why would someone give an argument but not say one of their reasons for believing it? You can even have an implicit conclusion. Yeah. So you might say, look, China's building up their military. There's war in the Middle East. Of course we all know what we should do with respect to military spending. And then leave it like that. That happens all the time in politics, right? Because they want people to draw their own conclusions, right? That makes them feel smart. So be careful of implicit claims. They're not always inappropriate, but you want to try and, it seems like unfair, like how could they do it? But this happens all the time. Right? And we'll see if maybe we get an example that has an implicit claim. It might be an example that they don't really fully explain, right? So if they said, technology, if the question is, does technology make people smarter or dumber? And they said, well, yeah, I have this roommate who played video games all the time and he flunked out. And they just leave it at that. They haven't really given a very strong reason anyway, right? What they're implicitly saying is the games made him or her dumb, that dumbness made them fall out of school, and it was all technology's fault. So when you're building your own argument, try to stay away from implicit claims, in this, especially in this venue. Just be explicit about what you mean and why you mean it, what your reason. Okay, questions? Just about this so far? Yes, no? I mean, it sort of makes sense. Give you an outline of the kind of things you should be thinking about as you look at the examples here.
So
okay.
You mean the tips is we should avoid implicit claims?
Yeah, or be aware of them, right? Because when you analyze somebody else's argument, they may include implicit claims.
So we should say it's wrong?
Well, you should say, one of the implicit claims in this argument is X, and X is either good or not good, right? So implicit claims can be evaluated. It's just that when you're responding to them, you want to call it out, right? You want to say, okay, this was an unstated premise, or this example is meant to show this, but I think it does or it doesn't. Something like that. Yeah, good question.
On the topic of implicit claims and inference, sometimes they expect you to have picked up on a certain idea and further analyze it before you answer a certain question in verbal. That's
true. That's certainly true in the nonverbal or in the verbal reasoning sections where they give you blanks that you're supposed to fill in, and you're supposed to analyze how they're related and so forth. Here I'm just trying to point out, when you're building a case, especially when it's a case on a general concern like this, I would avoid a lot of implicit claims. Just say what you mean and say it as best you can. And when you're analyzing somebody else's argument, if you see an implicit claim, it might be something worth looking at more explicitly, more carefully, to see whether it's good or bad. Now it's not that all of the time, that people leave things unsaid, sometimes intentionally, sometimes unintentionally. So this is the way English language works. In a way, this is the way human thinking works. So it's not as though they're trying to trick you, or trick you unduly. Okay, so what I want to do just for about 5 or 10 minutes is look at a couple of resources that you might look up on your own, or that might help you think about what separates analytical writing from other kinds of writing. Okay, and what I have up on the board is a little selection from a miniature guide to analytic thinking, and this comes from a nice little institute called the Critical Thinking Institute for Foundation for Critical Thinking, and they have all these little guides. I should have brought one. These little books. They're like $2, and they're written by professional people who are not just philosophers but specialize in critical thinking, in analytic writing, and they publish these little guides. They're like $4 or $5. And so they have them in all different general critical thinking. This is the analytic one that we're looking at here. How to learn and study, how to improve student learning. That's more for teachers. Anyway, so the selection I have up here is from this foundation, and they have really good examples and help you think about what analytic thinking is. Okay. So from that little handout, they have this chart, which claims to be the universal structures of thought. So it's just a graphical way to think about what's going on when you're doing this, right? And the idea is, if you can be a little more reflective on what it is they're asking you to do, you'll be able to do it better when you have to do it yourself, and you'll be able to evaluate other people's attempt to think analytically, right? So the first few, number 1 and number 2, are talking about the general purpose and the general point of view of the person offering or evaluating the argument. You won't have to think about this too much. I mean, you're taking an exam and you're trying to write analytically, so that's heavily affecting what your purpose is, right? You're not trying to write a big research paper or convince your mom that she should pay for a new car or something like that. And your general point of view, is going to be as a college student taking this exam, in English, etc., etc. Now, number 3 is interesting. Whenever we think, we have a set of assumptions. And this is inevitable. There's nothing necessarily bad about it. But the less aware we are of our assumptions, the less likely we'll be able to catch bad assumptions or inappropriate assumptions. Okay? So when you're thinking analytically, you want to think a little bit about what are your assumptions about the topic. So let's suppose the topic again was this technology makes people smarter or dumber, and you're trying to think up an argument about it. What would some of your background assumptions be? What might they be? An example of a background assumption. Think of one.
Maybe something along the lines of how technology can be used in other schools to gain.
Okay, good. So an assumption might be that there's a lot of new technology being invested in schools. I, for example, would have never thought of that.
Oh.
Right now, why? Why would I never have thought of that? What's that?
Am I
I have no idea whether you're correct. But you see, your assumptions reflect different experiences, and you know, I've never worked in K through 12, and yeah, and so I don't know. My kids are past that time, so, but it might very well be true. It might not be true, depending on where you grew up. If what you're talking about is the United States, notice that's an assumption. Were we talking about the United States?
No.
I didn't necessarily say, right? Now, we probably all assumed that. Maybe some of you didn't, but that's an assumption, right? Did the question actually say in the United States? Well, I didn't say it. I mean, I just threw that question out there, but that's an assumption, right? We were talking about the United States. Maybe we assume that there's more technology every year. I don't know whether that's true. I mean, I kind of think maybe it's true because I go to Fort Hays and we're getting new technology all the time. But maybe some schools, there's less technology now than there was 5 years ago. They ran out of money, they got a new principal, they had all kinds of trouble with the last technology, so they got rid of it. Good, so that's an assumption. Can you think of other assumptions that might affect the way you build a case or evaluate a case?
That technology is a prevalent thing that affects our intellect.
Okay, yeah, that technology can directly affect the intellect. Does it directly affect the intellect? I mean, I don't really know. I'm not a scientist. I mean, I kind of think it does. I don't know, is my phone making me dumber? That's good. So somebody might reject that assumption, right? That's really going to change the way they build an argument or evaluate an argument if right off the bat their main assumption is technology doesn't really have any direct effect on cognition at all. Maybe they think cognition is so evolutionarily old that it couldn't possibly be affected in a matter of 50 or 100 years. Good. Another assumption is that there is a right answer about this. You probably don't want to go the relativism route with the GRE, but you know, that's an assumption, right? That there is a right answer. There may not be. Who says there has to be a right answer? So just be thinking about those assumptions, especially when you're reading that other person's argument. What might they be assuming that you didn't?
Are you saying we should always pick a side and not be caught in the middle in a way?
Well, when you construct an argument, yes. You should pick a side and argue it as best you can. That doesn't mean you can't admit that there are limitations to your side. That's totally fine. But you don't want to leave, I don't think anyway in the GRE, you want to leave them thinking, well, it's all relative, or, you know. I mean, you could say that perhaps maybe there's no clear answer, but I don't think I think that's a little bit of a gamble.
So,
given what they're looking for.
So someone pick a side, and then you could go the moderate route. When you're,
Sure.
Presenting your argument.
Sure.
You would have to have
Right.
a side.
Yeah. So if they say technology makes us dumber, you could say, in certain respects, this is clearly wrong. Right. While maybe in other respects, it does make us dumber. Right. So yeah, I don't want to say that you want to make sweeping arguments for or against, right? If you don't think that's right. But on the other hand, you don't want to just say, well, it's just whatever anybody thinks, or there's no way we could answer this. I mean, don't say that.
Talking about the sweeping
assumptions or sweeping
answers,
claims.
So even when you do pick a side, try to avoid extreme.
Well, I think so. I mean, look, they're not going to give you a softball like, should we quit murdering innocents in country X? Who's going to argue, yes, we should continue to keep murdering innocent people in country X, right? No. I mean, they're going to give you questions on which you could probably reasonably take either side. So yeah, I think that's a good question. As I say, you probably want to avoid both extremes. One extreme would be to say, oh yes, it's so clearly obvious that this is the case that no one could ever offer any reason to doubt it. I mean, that would be the one extreme. The other extreme would be to say, there's no reason to even think there's any truth in this at all. It's just whatever anybody thinks. And we're not going to ask you something that's totally subjective, like, you know, is Sting the best rock and roll guitarist of all time?
So pretty
You
much
don't even know
objective.
who's. What's that?
It's not persuasive by any means.
Well, you want to be persuasive, but you're building a case. So the idea is that when you build the case, you're offering evidence and reasons and examples for believing your conclusion. So it's persuasive in that way, but it's not persuasive in the sense that what they're looking for is that you really convince them. You know what I mean? Because the way they offer the examples and the issues is going to be vague and open to interpretation and complicated. And maybe I should have just given some examples right away, but I think you'll get the flavor for it here. Okay, go here a little bit more quickly. So your assumptions lead to implications and consequences, right? So if you assumed we were talking about America, then that's going to have consequences for what you're arguing. Right? America does spend a lot of money on technology in the way that probably some other countries do not. America has a K-12 system that probably is unique in some ways to other educational systems, right? And so the way you come at the problem based on your assumptions will have implications and consequences for the way you build your argument. Okay, so what do you use then? Well, so these are things you have to be aware of on the right-hand side. Okay? It's good to be aware of your perspective, your assumptions, and the way those assumptions direct your thinking. Okay? On the left-hand side, we get more specific sorts of things. What are we going to use to build our argument? We use data, facts, and experiences. And we use those to make judgments or inferences. Right? So this is where the real rubber hits the road in analytical writing. Right? Your reasons, your premises are examples, facts, experiences, data that lead to a conclusion. Okay? Now, the conclusion is going to be based on concepts and theories. You won't have to worry so much about that. I think, you know, in this kind of an environment, they're not going to be looking for your knowledge of specific theories in a particular domain. Right? They're going to be looking for much more general kind of common sense knowledge. Right? And finally, all of that, of course, is to answer a question or solve a problem. Make sure when you're analyzing somebody else's argument that you really know what the conclusion is. Don't jump, as they say, don't jump to conclusions, right? About that. If you get that wrong, you're sunk. Does that make sense? You'll be attacking what in philosophy we call a straw man. You'll be attacking an argument that doesn't really exist.
So I have a question.
Sure.
Yeah, since we are taking the test in America, so the assumption must be based on America.
Well, it's a challenge for foreign students. Yeah, right. And foreign language speakers, because now they test the examples with a cross-section of students before they put them on there. And so they do that as a way to make sure that it's not unfair in that respect. But that doesn't mean, I don't think, that you should limit. I mean, let's say, for example, where did you grow up?
China.
China. Okay, so you grew up in China. So let's say your experience of the educational system and technology might be very different than somebody who grew up in the United States.
Yeah.
And it would be perfectly fine for you to use some experiences that you had and say, you know, being aware that other systems are different, but in your experience, you know, technology didn't make people dumber for this reason and this reason and this reason, right? But in that case, you want to, of course, make sure you're clear about your point of view. For all of us, we should make clear that we're, you know, what our point of view is. Right? So that's a really good question. A little tricky, but I think you'll be okay. I mean, what you want to steer clear of are really personal examples that have no explanation in terms of your perspective.
Okay.
right? So I mean, if you start talking about, I don't know, the Gaokao, what's the college exam that everyone in China has to take?
Gaokao.
Gaokao.
Yeah.
So if you start talking about the Gaokao, you know, the scorer is going to be like, what the hell is that, right? Right? Yeah. So if you use that word, you just have to explain what it is and why it makes sense for your conclusion.
So it's better to use American examples, like.
Well, it can be, but again, the idea is not so much where your examples come from, but whether they lead to the conclusion that you're arguing for. That's the most important thing. And that you be clear, as a writer, what your perspective is. And especially coming from a foreign perspective, then I think, you know, those, you don't want to discount your examples or your life experiences, but you want to maybe be a little extra clear.
Okay.
You know, if you're using an example that might be a little foreign for the scorer, that you explain what that is. Really good question. I don't know if that answered it for everybody.
They don't need to know.
Okay. Okay, good. Other questions? Okay, so let's take some example. So you can go to the website and you know, they have all these examples and they give scoring for the, like they'll score a few of them and show you, you know, a really crappy example, a not so crappy example, and then a good example. So here's one issue task, right? So this is where you have to build your own argument. Okay. As people rely more and more on technology to solve problems, the ability of humans to think for themselves will surely deteriorate. Discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with the statement, and explain your reasoning for the position you take. In developing and supporting your position, you should consider ways in which the statement might or might not hold true, and explain how these considerations shape your position. Okay. So, thinking then about what we've talked about so far, and having an example in front of us, what should you do? So you've got an example now. What's the first thing you want to do on the issue task?
Think out an assumption.
Okay, yeah, so maybe you want to start with assumption. It was kind of a trick question. The first thing you don't want to do is just start writing. Right? I really mean that. We get, and I know test taking is not easy for me, and you get nervous and the clock's ticking, but if you just start writing, oh man, who knows where the heck you're going to end up. I mean, and that's really the case. And people scoring these, you can, as a philosopher, you can just see this right away. People are just writing whatever the hell comes to their mind because they're nervous or they're not sure. That just is really clear. So better to be a little shorter and have a real argument than just a stream of consciousness.
So it's not necessarily judged based on length? Or
No, yeah.
Is there a minimum at least, though?
I don't know the answer to that question.
Is that logistics? You could just look it up, probably.
Yeah, someone, probably there's an answer to that.
Yeah, like last time when I took it, I don't have enough time, so I
Oh.
did not finish it.
Yeah.
It's bad, right?
That is also bad, right?
Unfinished is not good, but
Yeah.
short is not necessarily bad.
Right, and I think again, this is a really personal
to be
thing,
short.
but my suggestion is just, not that you do 10 minutes of note taking and then start writing, but at least don't just whatever the first thing that comes to your mind say, oh, that must be it, and start writing. Because what's going to happen is, as you're writing, you're thinking of other things, and you may be thinking of things which contradict what you're writing. Then you start panicking, and you start writing those things down and try to change your conclusion halfway through, right? And the reader's like, what is this person arguing? I thought they started out arguing X, and now they're giving an example which seems to prove not X. Okay? So if you just take some deep breaths, right, and say, okay, let's think about some reasons why or why not this might be the case. Then maybe think about some assumptions or think about your own perspective, right? And not jump in right away. Okay, so as people rely more and more on technology to solve problems, the ability of humans to think for themselves will surely deteriorate. So let's do this. what are some things that come to your mind? We're not evaluating them at first, right? Let's just throw out some ideas.
Technology is offering humans more open, like, ideas.
Okay, so technology makes ideas more accessible. Really interesting. Does it make good ideas accessible?
Not necessarily.
Yeah, good and bad, right? Good, so already there we have a really complicated assertion. It makes ideas more available, but then we can realize it also makes bad, right? There's still a lot of Nazis around in the world because Hitler's ideas are easy to find. What are some other ideas or reasons for or against?
Like humans are dumber.
Yeah, so we think humans today seem dumber. Why? What's a reason for that or an
They don't
example of
think.
that? What's it?
They don't think.
Okay.
Whenever I need something, I just type in Google.
Oh yeah, okay. So now notice, if you would just stop with humans are dumber today, that's just a kind of assumption or a blatant statement.
There's an assumption of causation.
What's that?
It's an assumption of causation.
Yeah, perhaps. Perhaps you're assuming that the technology caused them more dumber. But you want to flesh that out, right? And what you did then was flesh it out with an example. So the example is, I see myself and other people just Googling things. Now, what does that assume?
We don't think.
Why does Googling things not make us think?
Technology. Google is a technology company.
Yeah,
Like,
it is. We think the answers are on Google, or we think we're somehow not coming to the answers through Google.
We think. We trusted the answers.
Okay, we trust the answers from Google.
Yeah.
Okay, so notice you got to drill down in there a little bit and find out why does that example, what does that example really mean to me,
To
right?
support
Yeah,
my
because somebody else could have come up. I mean, I was thinking you were going to go a different direction,
Oh.
and that's okay.
Okay.
So again, let's just keep brainstorming ideas. What other reasons do you have here? So those were two really good ones. So
Maybe just a confounding thing that it's not necessarily that technology making people dumber, it's just people's laziness and reliance upon the technology, abusing the technology making it.
okay, good. So that's a complicated claim. Something on the lines of technology enables an inherent laziness or something like that. Why might we believe that?
Because when she was mentioning how people just Google things, we tend to point the finger at Google, which is the source of where this gathers, instead of pointing the finger at the action of Googling something.
Okay, yeah. So notice, in a simple example like Googling, we've already thought of 3 or 4 possible interpretations of what that means relative to this subject. Good, so still no conclusion. I don't want a conclusion yet. I just want more ideas about what's a relevant consideration.
Yeah, and in detail, like in old times, we would go to library.
Uh-huh.
So with the technology, now
We avoid libraries. Okay, is that good or bad? We want to, I mean, I think you're going to say it's bad. Why? I want you. What I'm asking you to do is be specific about why you think it's bad.
Because the research, the sources we can find in library is more reliable.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Okay, so you see how that answer is going to be a much stronger reason than just saying people don't go to libraries anymore. Somebody might say, well, yeah, I don't go to the library because I can look the library up online. But what you're saying is the library has better resources, more reliable scholarship,
Yeah.
and that's what we should be relying on. And to the extent that we're not doing that, we're not learning the truth.
Online has reliable databases as well.
Yeah, right. So you see how it could be different ways, and that's why you don't want to just start jotting stuff or writing stuff down right away. You want to think about it a little bit.
So you mean for our note-taking process, we should pro and con and
Yeah, you could maybe do a pro and con, or at least don't start writing your conclusion until you're sure that you have a couple of good reasons for it that you've thought through, right? So I mean, just here in talking, right, we can see different interpretations of similar examples.
As far as having scratch paper to write thoughts on, is it a better idea to write your thoughts or just assess it and think about it without writing?
Either way, it's a personal sort of thing. Some people like to keep track. My biggest thing is not to jump into a conclusion before you've thought it through a little bit, right? And whether you want to write down some reasons for and against, or just keep them in your mind as you go.
But it's really difficult to keep it in your mind.
Yeah, for some people, it's much better to write it down.
But writing takes too much time.
That's right. So it's a trade-off. I didn't create that problem. I'm innocent of that. What are some other reasons? You might think, support, or disprove this claim. Ability for humans to think for themselves will surely deteriorate.
I don't know about surely deteriorating. I think that's a little bit of an extreme.
Okay.
opinion.
Good. So that might be a point that you push on, right? That your conclusion might be that it's not surely going to deteriorate. It possibly could deteriorate. It might deteriorate in this respect, but not in this respect.
Isn't that pushing the relativism?
No, it's pushing the life is complicated.
Okay.
But I see your point, but I don't think you have to worry about that, right? Here's another hint. If you cannot think of any reason for the opposite side, you haven't thought enough. They're not going to give you an example that's so clearly one-sided. I mean, they just aren't. They structure it so it's not that way. Good. Some other people, what were some reasons for and against believing this?
We talked about sort of the accessibility to technology, the development of it throughout generations, but we also have to kind of assume that we're talking about more developed areas of like say the United States.
Okay, good. So you might begin that reason by qualifying with a statement. Okay, so here in the United States, we've seen kind of exponential growth in technology. Is that good or bad? Yeah, I mean, here, that's neutral, right? Because somebody could say, yeah, I see it growing and we're getting dumber. And other people could say, no, I see it growing and that's a great thing. So don't assume, these general facts, right? That's a fact. I think we can take that as a fact, right? That in the United States, technology has continued to grow in its importance in our everyday lives. That's a fact. But the fact alone doesn't prove anything. That fact, anyway. Right? Good. What else could we add to that, or what are some other considerations that might help build a case?
The accessibility of it.
Okay, so what are you thinking about?
Well, just like in this room, how many people have a cell phone and that computer and that projector.
Okay.
That we're getting information about a test where back, in maybe like less developed countries, they have to scratch for it early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So not just the sheer gain of number of technological devices, but their spread, the accessibility, right? So more people have access to technology. Again, I can ask, is that good or bad? I think you're implying that it's good, but you'll want to say why. Why is that good? Again, somebody could say, oh yeah, everybody's got a phone, but they're all playing Words with Friends. I know that because that's all I do on my phone. So just because we get cooler games and more of us can play them while we're in class doesn't mean that we're getting smarter. It may in fact prove the opposite. Right? If all we're doing with our technology is playing games, maybe we are getting dumber. Unless that assumes that games make us dumber. Maybe the games make us smarter. I've learned a lot of words on Words with Friends. I'm not kidding. I can't use them in a sentence, but I've learned a lot of three-letter words that begin with the letter X or Z, because those are the high point ones. Yeah, right. Okay, great point. Yeah.
In order to support your argument, I can come up with there's open educational resources.
Oh yeah, sure.
Because of the technology.
That's great.
Yeah.
So now that's a little more, you know what open educational resources are? So these are teaching materials generally, or first-person manuscripts or research that are made open for people to use without very much copyright restriction. So yeah, for free, right? So if you publish a wonderful study, what's your field? Biology. So you publish some wonderful study on biological causes of cancer, and rather than put it behind a paywall or write a book that costs $500 for students to buy, you very generously do it open educational resource. And then I can use that, and if it's true, right, her theory is correct, and she lets it out for free, that's a reason to think that technology is spreading truth. Now, what do we assume about that? That truth is good.
Good, yeah.
Makes sense. Good. So OER is a little more specific, right? And it's a little better example than a really more general thing like everybody has phones. Good. What are some more reasons for and against?
Well, I know in agriculture, we've modernized how we can grow crops
Oh,
and raise
yeah.
animals, and we've seen more people.
Yeah. Okay. So what's your perspective there?
I see it as a good thing because we're able to plant more faster, and and there is less developed countries that still do use a horse and a plow. But
Yeah. Yeah. Good. So your experience with technology in your field, be specific about that, but that's perfectly appropriate, right? You say, here's an example of X, Y, and Z that I see in my field that I believe helps lead to this certain conclusion. Now remember, we're building a case. We haven't got to that point yet. Because, I could think of some objections to that example that might go in a different direction, but we'll hold off. We haven't built a case yet. What are some other, one or two more reasons for or against?
I believe that humans are the creators of knowledge.
Okay.
And if we do not create knowledge, who's going to create it for ourselves?
Okay. So,
The premise on this is that technology is making us dumber.
okay.
And that it will deteriorate our ability to think.
Okay, good. So your reason for that is that, or your assumption kind of behind that is or technology cannot create knowledge.
We have to create it for them.
Okay, right. True or false?
False.
Okay, it depends, right? So some people are going to say true, some people are going to say false. What you want to do is be clear about why you say that. Now remember, they're not looking to agree with you in your conclusion. They're looking, did you build an argument? Okay? So in all of these things, actually, I can see probably ways we could interpret those for and against. We'll be careful in the next step to make sure that all of our facts, data, assertion, and assumptions are building a case rather than just sort of spread all over the place. Really good. So you want to be, in philosophy, it's really important, in analytical writing, it's really important to be clear about your central terms. And I'm thinking of some of them here. Information is a really general term, so try and narrow it down when you're using an example, right? So don't just say technology in general, say technology in farming, production, or technology in the K through 12 American classroom, right? It's much more rhetorically powerful. Your example was creativity. Big word, right? Could mean a lot of different things. Let's be clear. What do we mean by creativity? Try to give it a sentence or two to help the reader understand, right? Because if you use real general words and you don't back them up really clearly, then they invite counterexamples, as we have been doing here really well. Okay, so let's say, does anybody else have anything else to want to throw out? Reasons for or against? Okay, so now obviously we wouldn't have taken this long to do that, but so you've got some for and against. Now you had to build a case. Now what do? What should your next step be, do you think? Structure. Yeah, you kind of have to decide, all right, which side am I choosing and what's the best way to put this together, right? So again, think like a lawyer. A lawyer is going to argue for their client not guilty. Right? A defense lawyer, right? Not guilty. It's always going to be the conclusion, right? And they can get there any different number of paths, right? And so similarly, once you've decided, okay, I think I'm going to argue, at least in this specific case, that technology is going to make us dumber or will not make us dumber, then you start putting the argument together, right? You start identifying all of your reasons, whether they are facts, whether they're a kind of data set, right? Whether they're you know, personal experiences or more general cultural sort of trends or experiences, and you try to put them all together, leading to that conclusion, right? You can say the conclusion first if you want, rhetorically, that can be powerful, or you can say it at the beginning and say it at the end, or you could not say it at the beginning and say it at the end. Probably shouldn't say it in the middle. It's a little bit simpler to say it at the beginning and the end, right? So you say, just give an example. While it is true that technology has deteriorated our ability to concentrate in college classes, it is not true more generally. Right? That would be a conclusion. And you would go on and offer all your reasons for that, and then you would restate your conclusion to wrap it up. Comments, questions,
Do you
objections?
mean we have to include the supporting point
And the conclusion, yep, that's the whole, what they're looking for is not just the conclusion. And they don't really care what your conclusion is. What they care is that you back up your conclusion. Right? You have reasons and premises that support it. And remember, your examples have to be clear enough that they do support your conclusion, right? So some of the examples that we came up with were good ones, but they weren't clear enough to really necessarily lend support. So you want to be careful about that. Don't offer up ambiguous examples, right?
So we must choose a side.
Yeah. Oh yeah. On this one you have to. Right? So discuss the extent to which you agree or disagree with that statement. Explain your reasoning. Develop your ideas. Support them.
Well, it's a toss-up.
Yeah, it might be. Many of these are, and I would think what you want to do there is just, you know, choose the side where the case seems easiest to build. You know, using if you have a little bit better examples on one side, you just use that side. It's certainly always appropriate to, you know, it says the extent to which you agree. Right? Almost nobody's going to say, "Oh, it's 100% totally obvious." Right? The extent to which you agree can be 51%. I mean, technically it could be 50-50, but I would stay away from it. Does that make sense?
As far as saying that,
Mm-hmm.
pick the better argument. So if you know that you can present a better argument for a viewpoint that you're not 100% sure on,
Mhm.
just pick that.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you really, given the time you have,
Because
maybe you can, you know, maybe there'll be some examples where you just really feel strongly that one side is a better argument. But as I said before, if you can't think of a reason against it, you haven't thought enough, because they're offering really general, vague kinds of.
yeah, and they're not going to judge you whether you think it does make people dumber or not. They
No!
just want to see your argument.
That's right.
So-
That's right. That's right. They want to see that you're thinking analytically. To see someone else's attempted argument at analytical writing, and you're going to evaluate it. Okay? Now, remember, the goal is not to give your personal opinion. Okay? Does that make sense? The goal is for you to evaluate what's out there already, that argument in front of you. Okay? So let's take a look at this one. In surveys, Mason City residents rank water sports, swimming, boating, and fishing, among their favorite recreational activities. The Mason River, flowing through the city, is rarely used for these pursuits. However, and the City Park Department devotes little of its budget to maintaining riverside recreational facilities. For years, there have been complaints from residents about the quality of the river's water and the river's smell. In response, the state has recently announced plans to clean up Mason River. Use of the river for water sports is therefore sure to increase. The city government should, for that reason, devote more money in this year's budget to riverside recreation facilities. Okay. Argument. Write a response in which you examine the stated or unstated assumptions of the argument. Be sure to explain how the argument depends on the assumptions and what the implications are if the assumptions are proven unwarranted. Okay? So, What's your first task here? When you're given an argument, what should the first thing you'd be looking to identify? Yeah, good. So here you're going to work backwards. Right? In the first example, I was suggesting probably hold off on your conclusion. Think about some reasons first, and then put together that argument. Here you want to start the opposite way. I think for most people this is the best way to do it, is look through and find that conclusion. What's the conclusion of this argument? And be specific.
Government should invest.
Yes. The city government should, for that reason, devote more money in this year's budget to riverside recreational facilities. So this one was pretty easy. The conclusion is the last grammatical sentence. Okay? Just beware, the conclusion can be implicit, although I don't know on this exam that they would do that to you. The conclusion can be part of a grammatical sentence that involves a premise.
Is this a correct length?
What's that?
Is this like a good representative length of what they would put for a session?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Really?
Yeah, it is.
And
This
maybe
is right off
30
their webpage.
30 minutes?
Yeah.
Is that what it is?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Do you think that's too much or not enough?
That's perfect.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So they're not going to be huge. If you're coming from philosophy background, they're not going to be as big as what you're used to. So they're fairly, I wouldn't say simple, but this is not going to be astrophysics or just war theory or something like that, right? Okay. So does everyone understand that that's the conclusion? I mean, any questions about that? Okay. So now, next step is identify the reasons or the premises of that conclusion. What are some of the premises that are most important here? So,
That people's attendance will increase as the water is cleaned up.
okay, good. So, let's just do this. Oh, it's going to be pretty hard to highlight the computer screen. Have you ever seen that commercial from the guy from the 70s is putting the white out on his computer screen because he made a typing mistake? That's just about what I tried to do here. Because I was thinking it was on this thing. Sorry. No, I can't highlight the conclusion. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to say that again.
Maybe you can copy it into Word to highlight if you wish.
Yeah, that's right. What was your premise?
That people's attendance will increase to that area as the water gets cleaned up.
Okay, good. So attendance will increase. Why is that? Because the water will get cleaned up. Okay. Good. What are some other reasons for that are offered for the conclusion that we should increase government spending?
Well, we were talking about how the survey showed that they rank water sports as one of their favorites.
Good. So this is some data. This is some facts, right, that they offer in support. Now notice, those facts don't say, should we clean up the river and increase money? They're just asking, what are your favorite water recreational activities? So do you hear the difference? Okay, so this is a ranking of water activities. Good. This is big, right? What would happen if that statement wasn't in there?
This would be a terrible.
Yeah, right? We spend all this money and we'd have all these reasons, but oh yeah, we forgot it still smells down there, right? So that's a crucial part of the argument. Okay? Now, in a logic class, I would be really happy if you sort of listed these all out, right? But you may just want to do this in your mind. But you see, how many did we have? I think 5? About 5 related claims, right? Any one of those could be good or bad, true or false, important or not important, right? Together, they make a case for this conclusion. And your job now is to evaluate it. So, evaluate away. What do you think?
4 out of 10.
You would say 4 out of 10. Give it a 4 out of 10. Good. So, probably they're not going to give you one that has all bad reasons. They're probably not going to give you one that has no empirical evidence at all. But on the other hand, they're not going to give you one that's full of awesome empirical evidence and nothing else, and probably they're not going to give you one that's full of only good reasons. Okay? So you just kind of have that in the back of your mind as you look through. If all you can see are good reasons for building, is it building or funding, then you got to think a little bit more, because probably some of these are not going to be such good reasons, or at least not clearly good reasons. Okay? Good. So you give it a 4 out of 10. That's one way to think about it, is to kind of rank it. And you might do a gut reaction to that. But again, you want to be careful of saying, first thing, and we didn't because we've been looking at this a little bit, but you don't want to just jump out and say, okay, here's the argument, 4 out of 10, and then start writing. You want to have some ideas about why is it 4 out of 10 or 8 out of 10.